I turned 68 the day the ribbon paper came off in a soft hush, and a bottle of whiskey slid into my hands. Limited release, copper-stamped label, cork still sealed. The card tucked under the bow said 3 words in a tight, familiar hand. "Happy birthday, Dad. My son, Ethan." I quit drinking years ago, after the heart scare and after a series of talks with my boy that weren't really talks anymore. The bottle sat on my kitchen counter like a good memory left in the wrong room. I didn't uncork it. I set it in the cabinet beside the crystal glasses my late wife used to polish and grumble about. Then I called Robert, Ethan's father-in-law, and one of the few men left, who still asks how the morning looks. "Come by," I said. "I've got a birthday bottle I won't be opening." He chuckled. "You off the stuff, huh?" "Yes," I said. "Have a sip for me." That afternoon, Robert's porch held the usual warmth. Wooden chair legs ticking the planks, his tea-stained mug resting a faint gold halo on the rail. I handed him the bottle. He whistled at the label. "Fancy?" He didn't pour right then. We talked rain in the gutters, the old downspout that miraculously hadn't leaked, his wife reminding him from the doorway to feed her plants. Small weather, as men say. I left before the light got thin. Before dawn the next day, my phone rattled on the nightstand. Robert's daughter, breath short. "Mr. Hale, my dad. We're at the hospital. He was up sick all night, shaking. This morning he could barely stand." Somewhere behind her, a monitor ticked time like a metronome. "What do they think?" I asked. "Not food poisoning," she said. "Something else." I stood in my kitchen in the gray of early light, opened the cabinet, and lifted the bottle I had passed along. I have old habits. One of them is to write dates on anything that doesn't fit the day. I brought the glass to my nose. Oak and nut and something else I couldn't place. Not bitter, not obvious. Just a hair out of tune. On the second shelf, I found a tiny unmarked vial I didn't remember owning. The kind a man uses for spices or screws, lodged behind a stack of saucers I never touch. There was a dusting of pale powder stuck in the seam of its lid. I set it down like it could speak if I gave it half a chance. It didn't. Fine. Then paperwood. Gary runs a small veterinary lab off Route 7. We've known each other long enough that favors don't need big words, only clean containers. I packed a small sample of the whiskey, fresh bottle cap screwed tight, and the vial in a zip bag, wrote the time and date on masking tape, and drove. Gary doesn't scare easy, but he frowns when something doesn't belong. He drew off a milliliter, ran it past a couple of rapid screens, the kind that are more compass than map. "There's a signal here," he said, tapping a readout that meant little to me. "Plant origin, not grain. Could be a lot of things. I'm not calling it." He looked at the residue in the vial. "This looks like somebody's home project. Whatever you're thinking, call the police, Richard. I'll keep the chain on anything you give me and send it to the state lab." "And a chain," I said, and felt my feet find concrete. I left with the copies of intake forms, a receipt, and the back of my hand ink-stamped. Paper. Men my age don't win with speed. We win with record. I phoned the non-emergency line and asked for someone who knew what chain of custody meant. Detective Reyes returned my call an hour later. "Bring me everything," she said. "Don't throw anything away. If you take a photo, write down when and where you took it. Until we know what we have, We act like every step is going to be read out loud to strangers. That same afternoon, I did something I've done since the service when I've had reason to suspect a boundary has been crossed. I threaded a single hair-thin line of red sewing thread across my back door frame and dot glued the ends to the paint. Barely visible if you don't know to look. Snap it once, and it won't lie for you again. I logged the placement, date, time, exact location, in a notebook that still smells faintly of motor oil. I checked the lock plate with a flashlight and saw the kind of scratch you get when a key isn't quite right, and someone forces patience onto metal. Not much. Enough to write down. I took 2 photos with the day's paper in frame to timestamp the moment the old-fashioned way, because sometimes a judge trusts ink and pulp more than metadata. The bottle went back in the cabinet. I set a chair by the kitchen window and let the sun roll through. By evening, my phone buzzed again. Ethan. "Dad, can we talk?" he said. "In person?" We chose a coffee shop with a bell on the door and halves of conversations hanging from the ceiling. I placed my small recorder on the table, plain as a spoon. "I'm recording," I said. "Of course," he replied, a twitch of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His tie was too tight for the heat. He didn't mention the bottle. I didn't either. We talked weather, idle work, the way men circle a subject to see if it's moving. Then he said, casual as a magazine headline, "Did you give the whiskey to Robert? Not your bottle? Not my gift. The whiskey." I let the silence run a couple of seconds, so the machine could make room for it. "Why do you ask?" I said. He folded his hands once, opened them, picked an invisible crumb off his sleeve. The recorder has good ears. It heard his breathing. It heard 3 seconds of nothing, which, in my experience, is not nothing at all. "I thought you quit drinking," he said finally. "I did," I said. "So I passed it along." He looked at me with the polite concern people use when they're hoping your answer will absolve them of the next question. "How's Robert?" he asked. "Hospital," I said. "They're running tests." We didn't stay long. He left first. I watched him cross the street without looking up once. I paid cash for the coffee and kept the receipt. Sometimes you keep a receipt for the ink as much as the proof. That night, when I came home, the red thread was snapped. The back door was locked. The latch hadn't been forced. No drawers riffled. No footprints. The thing about tripwires is they tell you 2 stories. That someone came, and that whoever came believed they would be welcome again. I didn't touch the frame. I took photos from 4 angles. I wrote down the time. I called Reyes. "Don't call him," she said. "Don't text him. Save your messages, keep your schedule normal, and don't bait anyone. I'll get a patrol to sweep the block, and we'll move on a warrant as soon as we have lab confirmation. If you see a car idling on your street, note the plate. But don't go out there, Mr. Hale. People want you to step outside your lane. Please don't." She came by the next morning, a calm woman with a yellow legal pad and the posture of someone who expects to testify one day about where her hands were. We bagged the vial and the bottle properly, sealed, initialed, dated. She called Gary, spoke in the language of chain and custody and transfer. He said the magic words, "I can account for every minute that sample has been in my lab." And the path between suspicion and evidence got a little less foggy. "The plant you mentioned," she said to Gary on speaker. "You said Could be when Mr. Hale was in your office. I said plant origin, Gary answered, careful. I'm not calling species. If state tox screens broad positive for glycosides or trematol derivatives, they'll tell you. I'm just the weather vane. White snake root, I said, the term floating up from somewhere. I read about it once in a book on frontier sickness, milk sickness. People used to get it when cows ate the plant. Reyes wrote the words without nodding. Fiction has given us too many bad ideas, she said. Let's keep ours good. You did right to call us Mr. Hale. Now, let us do ours. I wanted to ask how a bottle of whiskey would carry a plant that grows in shade, how something that old could live quiet in amber. I didn't. Curiosity has its place. Paper has priority. That evening I sat in my study, the recorder on my desk, my notebook open to the page with the broken thread. I thought about the chorus of small things that had started to sing, the scratch on the strike plate, the vial behind the saucers, the coffee shop silence, the question about whether I'd given Robert the bottle. I thought about how much of a man's life is a ledger he doesn't know he's keeping until someone asks to see the books. At 10, headlights painted my living room wall. They idled. They went. I wrote down the time, the make, what I could guess at the model. I didn't lift the blind. I didn't go to the window. Before bed, I did one more thing I hadn't done in a long time. I put a fireproof envelope on the kitchen table and labeled it in black marker. If found, deliver to Det. Reyes. Inside, I placed a copy of the coffee receipt, the recorder's micro SD, a printed list of dates and times from the last 48 hours, and a note in my hand. I am not drinking. The bottle was a gift. I passed it on. If I am found unconscious, do not assume a relapse. Test for plant toxins. It felt dramatic when I wrote it. It felt necessary when I folded it. The house slept the way honest houses sleep. Quiet, with wood that remembers, cold and heat by the way it creaks. I lay there and counted the breath between the creaks until I didn't need to count any more. In the morning, Reyes called with the first clear line of the day. State lab confirms plant-derived toxin consistent with white snake root compounds, she said. That's not a diagnosis. That's a lane. We're executing a warrant this afternoon. I looked at my watch, wrote down the time, and closed the notebook. Whatever came next would belong to paper, not guesswork. And paper, if you treat it right, is a wall no one sees until they hit it. Detective Reyes was not a drum roll kind of person. At 2 o'clock, she called from her car. We're going in, she said. Stay home. I'll brief you when I can say the word evidence without jinxing anything. The warrant team hit Ethan's place at 2:27 p.m. I know because I had my notebook open, not because I was there. Front door, knock and announce compliant entry, she told me later, all the phrases that keep a case from bleeding at the edges. He was surprised, she added. And let the words sit there like a nailhead you don't need to hammer. They took photographs first, rooms in the state they were found, drawers before hands touched them, phone screens dark with the timestamp growing on the body cams. Then they started the slow work of searching. Kitchens are truth tellers. In the second cabinet left of the stove, behind a line of ordinary bottles, vanilla, bitters, a stubborn jar of star anise, they found 3 small glass containers taped with masking tape labels, stained by fingers. WSR, root WSR, tincture, WSR, dried. The handwriting was my son's, tight, cautious, a little right-leaning from school days when teachers taught penmanship like it might save a life. On a shelf in the spare room, his old office, sat a black spiral notebook with a cracked spine. Inside were charts written with a tidy cruelty. Initials at the top of columns, doses, dates, results, RC, FD, asterisks, triangles. First pour, weak heart. One line read. There is a particular quiet your body makes when it decides to keep you from breaking in half. I heard it then. They bagged the notebook in a clear sleeve, seal, initials, date. In a desk drawer, they found a battered Android phone with no SIM card and scuffed edges. Burner, Reyes said. We'll image it. In the porch storage, tucked behind a winter coil hose, a small jar of shredded roots wrapped in a produce bag. It smelled like woods after rain and something medicinal, the way old remedies smell when they've outlived their kindness. What else? I asked, because a man asks even when he knows the answer will be heavier than his next breath. A DSLR with a long lens, she said, flipping through the inventory on her lap. On the SD card, a series of photos taken from a distance, angles on your porch, your back door, the kitchen window, time and date stamps between 10 and midnight. We'll authenticate metadata, but the lens doesn't lie much. She closed the folder. Mr. Hale, I'm sorry. I thanked her because there are times when that's the only verb that keeps your throat from closing. After we hung up, I walked to the back door and looked at the empty space where the red thread had been. It was just paint now. By evening, the state lab phoned Reyes. Preliminary tox confirmed the presence of trematone compounds, metabolites consistent with Ageratina altissima, the plant we keep calling white snake root because the old books did. Gary texted me a single word, confirmed. He is a man who loves nouns. 2 days later, a knock at my door came soft enough to be decent. Leah stood there, hair tied back, a coat thrown over clothes that looked like she'd chosen them with the lights off. Robert's better, she said fast. They think he'll be okay with treatment. Then she held up a canvas tote like it might bite. I brought this. I can't keep it in the house. At my kitchen table, she slid out a scuffed silver laptop, a zip bag with a thumb drive, and a paper notebook, not unlike the one seized from Ethan's office. He uses the black one for experiments, she said, voice low. This was mine a long time ago. He borrowed it when his went in for repair. I never asked for it back. She opened the lid. The old machine sighed. I don't know what helps, she said, so I printed a list. She handed me a sheet of paper. Search terms, dates, times, trematol toxicity, milk sickness history, how to make tincture from root, dosage calculator herb, how much alcohol masks bitter taste, first pour meaning whiskey, heart failure symptoms, older male. I felt the room tilt a degree and then right itself. Leah, I said carefully, are you safe? Yes, she said, now that it's out loud. She wiped at one eye with the side of a thumb. I don't know when I stopped being brave. I only know that today I can be. I called Reyes, who came quick. Thanked Leah like thanks could knit a layer of skin back over something raw, and took custody. Photographs, signatures, seals. On the way out, Leah turned back to me. He wasn't always like this, she said. The sentence died after 6 words, because the past tense isn't long enough to save anyone. Ethan was arraigned the next morning. No cuffs, just the solemn jewelry of the law, a docket number and conditions. The state asked for no contact with me or Robert. The judge granted it. The papers called it a poisoning case with family entanglements, as if the word could do any real work for anyone. A week later, his attorney reached out through Reyes to my own counsel. There's room for a deal. Words sat on a conference table like cold coffee. Attempted aggravated assault with a stipulated sentence, the lawyer said, as if the syllables might climb down from the air and fold themselves into a lighter future. We can keep this out of trial, he added. Spare the family. Family. There's a word I no longer let anyone use as leverage. In a small room with carpet that eats footsteps, my lawyer asked, "What do you want, Richard?" I looked at the recorder on the table, off but present, and the manila folder with copies of the photographs, the notebook scans, the lab letters. I want the truth read aloud, I said, in a room where people write down what they hear. I want Robert to hear the word for what almost happened to him. I want to hear the word for what almost happened to me. I want paper to say it, not rumor. I folded my hands. If the state believes the evidence meets the charge, I will not ask them to lower it so I can sleep worse. The offer vanished the way certain fog does. One breeze, and what you thought was an option is only a trick of air. Pretrial bled into trial, the way water finds the lowest place, inevitable, slow, steady. On the first morning, the courtroom filled with the sound of other people's lives. Heels, whispers, a bailiff's tired voice. Ethan sat at counsel table in a new suit that didn't know him yet. He didn't turn around. I didn't expect him to. The state went first. The prosecutor was a careful woman who knew the value of a small step done right. She laid the bricks of her opening slowly. A gift bottle, a man who no longer drank, a second man in a hospital, preliminary tests pointing to plant-derived toxins, a warrant, a search, a set of label jars, a notebook, a burner phone, photographs, a spouse with a bag of old electronics, and a printout of search terms that do not belong to innocent projects. She didn't say monster. She said choices. They called Gary to explain the difference between a screen and a confirmation without insulting anyone's intelligence. He held up his hands the way good technicians do when they guard the edges of their lane. I don't name species, he said. The state lab does. I said plant origin and consistent with. They said Ageratina altissima derivatives. The jurors wrote words down like they were learning a new recipe. A toxicologist from the state lab walked them through trematone and its cousins, how compounds can end up in animal products, how history called it milk sickness before it learned the Latin, how tinctures concentrate a thing's intent. The bottle from my cabinet, the residue from the vial, the swabs from Ethan's kitchen, the labeled jars, all of it took a turn under lights, each with a chain of signatures long enough to bridge doubt. Then came the notebook. Enlarged pages went up on a screen. Black spiral in the corner, ruled lines, neat columns. RC at the top of one, FD at the top of another. Dates, doses, observations. First pour, weak heart. The defense objected. The judge admitted. The jury leaned forward almost as one body. The burner phone gave them texts. Drafts never sent, notes saved in a clumsy app. Bottle needs to be first impression. One line read, bitterness hides best. W. Honey or Nut read another. A clipped photo. My porch. Shot from across the street at 10:41 p.m. Leah sat like a wire-drawn fine. When she testified, her voice held. She told them about the laptop, the searches, the day she realized that curiosity was not the right word. The defense tried to draw her into old fights. She stayed in the present tense where truth does its solid work. When the state rested, the defense called a handwriting expert to say a man can mimic another man's hand. They suggested contamination, a borrowed book, a shared account. They tried to build fog. Fog can be a structure if you squint. The prosecutor didn't squint. She stacked the physical beside the digital beside the human. Jars, plus notebook, plus photos, plus search terms, plus the coffee shop recording with its 3 seconds of silence where a yes might have lived. Taken alone, she told the jury, each piece is a question. Taken together, they answer themselves. The judge excused us for the day with the sentence judges say when they want us to behave like citizens. I left the courthouse by a door that didn't require me to pass the benches. On the sidewalk, a breeze lifted the edges of my notes and settled them again. Across the street, a bus sighed the way big machines do when they're patient. That night, I slept in my chair. Not because I was old, but because the chair knew the shape of me when I needed to be held up by something that had never once asked me to explain myself. In the morning, before court, I walked to Robert's room with a bag of oranges because hospitals like little acts of normal. He looked better, tired in the way of men who have done hard work with their bodies. I heard they're saying the words, he said. They are, I told him. I heard you're still here, he said. I am. On the second afternoon, the jury filed back in sooner than anyone pretended to expect. The foreman handed the paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge, who read it without decoration. The word was there, the one that ends certain stories and begins others. Guilty. Ethan stood very still. He didn't look for me. I didn't offer my face for whatever he wanted to do with it. There are moments when mercy is learning where to place your eyes. Sentencing would come later. Paper needs time to think. We were dismissed into a world that had gone on without us for 2 days and wanted us back as if nothing had happened. The sidewalk always feels obscene after a verdict. Common, loud, forgiving in ways that make you suspicious of forgiveness. I went home. I opened my fireproof envelope, added 2 more items, my jury notes and the printed verdict, and sealed it again. The back door paint was new where the thread had once stuck. I ran a finger along the dry line and felt nothing but the solid fact of work done when it needed doing. Sentencing day came like a weather change you feel in your knuckles first. The courtroom was the same room. It's always the same room. But the air had a different task. No speeches today, only measurements. The judge read the pre-sentence report as if she were balancing lumber on a scale. Prior history, planning, potential for harm, victim impact. Words that, stacked together, tell a story without adjectives. Robert spoke first. He didn't dramatize. Your Honor, he said, I like tea and porch swings and feeding my wife's plants. I also like waking up. I'm grateful. I still do. He turned his head once, not far. The precise amount a man turns when he wants another man to know he has been seen and will not be looked at again. When my turn came, I didn't try to translate a father's mouth into a prosecutor's mouth. I'm not here to ask for cruelty, I said. I'm here to ask for safety, for the court to name what nearly happened, and to build enough wall between it and the rest of us that we can sleep. I am an old builder. I believe in level and plumb. I also believe paper can be a wall if you draft it right. The judge nodded once like a carpenter checking square. She read the number. It was not light. It was not a number any man would put on a card and slip into his pocket. There were conditions attached. No contact orders, mandatory treatment, the bureaucracies of consequence that keep a community from forgetting why it gathered. He didn't look back when the deputies moved. I didn't stand. Mercy, again, is sometimes just keeping your hands where they belong. Afterwards, the hallway behaved like hallways do, swallowing people and grief in equal measure. Reyes found me by the elevators. You did the hard part long before they read that number, she said. You called. I thanked her, and meant the words the way a man means them when he understands that a small decision made at a kitchen table can keep a life from splitting. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store. Bought a new deadbolt, not because the old one failed, but because sometimes your hands need to touch the fix. At the counter, the clerk asked if I needed help installing. I know where the screws go, I said. He grinned. Most folks don't. I didn't tell him that most folks haven't had a reason to learn where their safety lives. At the house, I took down the fireproof envelope, opened it, and added one last piece. The sentencing order. Stapled, stamped, dull as a tax form, and exactly as powerful. Then I wrote across a clean sheet of paper 3 simple lines and taped it to the inside of the cabinet nearest the back door, where I keep the light bulbs and extra batteries. Not for the police. For me. For the mornings that follow nights. 3 paper wall rules. Write, keep, timestamp. If something matters, put it where time can find it later. Photographs with a newspaper. Receipts. A line in a notebook with the hour and minute. Memory is a decent witness. Paper is a better one. Stack evidence in 3s. Physical pluses, digital plus human. A jar and a lab letter. A search term and a text. A silence on a recording and a testimony that holds. 1 leg wobbles. 3 legs hold a table upright in a storm. Let documents do the shouting. Rage invites counter-rage. Paper invites a signature. When your feelings jam, draft. When your voice shakes, file. I read the rules out loud once, like a man checking the grain before he cuts. Then I made tea. It tasted like relief does when it doesn't brag. Days reassembled themselves. Robert came by on afternoons to return what we call normal, sitting, pointing at clouds, talking about a stubborn squirrel that keeps puzzling the feeder. His color improved. He walks slower on cold mornings. So do I. We compared notes on naps the way other men compare notes on engines. Leah called now and then. We didn't talk about outcomes. We talked about next steps that had nothing to do with courtrooms, mending, appointments, the long, plain business of living decently. Once she said, "He wasn't always like this." I told her the truth that fits on a matchbook. Neither was I. People change both ways. The task is to change toward what you can carry into a small room without lowering your eyes. One evening, I sat on the back steps and watched dusk move across the yard in clean blue strokes. The paint over the door jamb, where the thread had once been, looked no different from the rest. That pleased me. The idea that repairs don't have to advertise themselves to be real. A breeze found the chimes and made a sound like a sentence the mouth doesn't need to finish. The phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. I let it ring once more than I usually would and answered. A voice on the other end said my name the way people do when they're practicing not to break. It's Ethan. Air left my lungs at a measured rate. All right, I said. He spoke into a space set by restraints and rules. They read me the number today, he said. Yes. I wanted to say. He stopped. A door closed somewhere on his end. A footstep climbed. I wanted to say I know that paper was the right way. Silence again, not the hiding kind from the coffee shop, a different kind, the kind that respects a fence it cannot cross. That's all, he said. All right, I said again. We'll keep breathing. We will, he said. The line ended with the soft mechanical sound that has closed more conversations than wisdom ever has. That night I slept and woke and slept again, a normal man's punctuation. In the morning, I folded the 3 rules into an envelope addressed to nobody and slid it into the fireproof box. I don't plan to forget. I also don't plan to rehearse pain as if practice makes it safer. Paper remembers for me. The lake called the way old places call. You don't hear your name, you hear your shape. I drove north with a thermos and a bag of oranges because both are good companions. The road threaded through pines that have seen more winters than I will. Clear view lay flat as a piece of cut metal. Dinah met me on the porch with her clipboard and a smile that never got in the way of work. The brass plaque by the door caught a small strip of light. Given in memory of Caroline Hale. May this house be a quiet kind of healing. How's your group? I asked. 5 couples, she said. They're learning the new math. How to add back sleep and subtract noise. She gestured at the water. We're getting good at small sequences. Coffee, walk, sit, repeat. I nodded. Builders have always trusted repetition more than revelation. I walked the rooms with the simple satisfaction of a man checking trim after paint. No hidden teeth anymore. No tripwires. The house had other work now. In the pantry, I opened the door and looked at 2 photographs taped inside. A winter sun on the dock. A woman in a sweater that didn't warm her but warmed me. I touched the tape with a finger as if my hand could tell glue to hold forever. On the porch, I took the thermos lid as a cup and watched a pair of ducks write lazy punctuation on the cove. Somewhere behind me, quiet laughter rose and fell, the kind that makes a wall feel like a wall and not a cliff. My phone stayed in my pocket. Some days you answer messages by allowing a day to end well. When the light turned the lake to hammered copper, I locked the door and listened for the sound a good door makes when it meets its frame. Firm, honest, final enough to trust and open enough to use. I set the alarm, stepped down to the gravel, and looked back once, not to check, but to appreciate. People think stories end with a gavel or a siren. Most of them don't. They end in kitchens where a man writes a time in the margin of a page. They end on porches where a brass plate says a sentence you can live by. They end with rules taped to a cabinet and the promise you make to yourself to prefer paper over heat, level over tilt, work over theatrics. On the way home, the radio stayed off. The engine did what engines do best, kept going. Night came down in the way good nights do, without argument. I turned on my porch light because a home shouldn't greet you in the dark. Caroline taught me that. I locked the new deadbolt, felt its seat, and set the kettle on for tea. There are victories that throw confetti, and there are those that simply let you sleep. I took the second kind. Quiet is not nothing. Quiet is the sound a paper wall makes after it holds.